what are we going to go through today? I wanted to schedule this live stream today. Look, okay, I can see the chat's coming up there. Thank you, subscribers. Amazing work, man. I respect you. Collaborate with Aaron Ra maybe in a live stream. I'd love to collaborate with pretty much anyone. Hey, Dale. Now collaboration can be tricky just to figure out, like, what are we actually collaborating on? What are we actually doing? I've done a small kind of sort of collaboration with Answer Man. Not collaboration as far as like anything that's created content for my channel, but I helped him create a script for his channel, which has, and yes, this is kind of bragging a little bit on me here, I guess, but it's become the #1 video on his channel. So if you guys haven't checked that out already, I made a post about it on my channel because I definitely wanted to do anything I could to, help promote his work, especially since I had helped create that video. But this one here, A Confession Gone Wrong, Priest versus Literal Christianity, that's the one that I helped him make, and it's actually his most popular video. Not that it's all me, of course, but the fact that I had a hand in making the script made me feel pretty cool. And I after I get done with this, I have to send him another piece of information because I have a new project for him and I to work on that I'm very excited. I think he's gonna enjoy working on, and that'll be more of a true collaboration where we'll have both of us in the video, and we'll probably cross post it to both of the channels, because you may have seen that YouTube has this feature now where you can collaborate truly on a video where you can have 2 or more channel creators that are listed as creators on the video. So I will be doing that as well. But in terms of other collaborations, yeah, I'd love to. I've reached out to a few. A lot of times I get no answers. That's not a dig on anyone. Partially it's because people are busy. People have inboxes that are full. People don't know me or don't like me, which is fine too. They may be wondering, why is this guy with a tiny channel pinging them about stuff? So collaborations can be kind of hard to work out. I know Aaron Ra, he's been doing this a long time, and he may not even care to collaborate with me on any level, but we'll see. And that's actually not actually how you say his name. I always forget how you say his name. He says it a different way. But anyway, getting off of that tangent, this is the thing that I wanted to talk about today. Not Answer Man, although he's awesome. Not collaborations, but I saw this, and I guess this came out, I don't know, 11 days ago or something like that. But I hadn't seen it. Somehow it just kind of flown by my radar. And I thought, ooh, that's interesting to talk about. So let's have a little discussion about this. I'm gonna put my notes over here. Hold up. This was very interesting to me because, it says, as you can see from the title, white evangelicals remain among Trump's strongest supporters, but they're less supportive than a year ago. And I thought, ooh, we need to dive into this a little bit. So first of all, let's look. If you aren't sure, this is coming from the Pew Research Center. I'm not going to put a link to it because you can Google it. If you Google Pew Research Center, white evangelicals, Trump, or whatever, it'll come up very high in the returns, the Google search returns. Pew is a very well-recognized name in these types of studies, and they do a lot of work with regard to religion. If you're in the US, you've probably heard of them many times. If you're one of my international viewers, you may not be as familiar with it, but very well respected surveyor of religious topics, and the pollsters, I guess I should call them, because polls aren't just about politics. But in this case, I can't say this surprised me at all, but I still thought, ooh, I need to jump on a live stream and just talk to some people about this. This is my therapy. Y'all are, between the drink and y'all are basically my unpaid therapist. So I'm sitting on your couch right now. I'm going to get out a few thoughts about this. So, when we look at the examples that it's giving us, First of all, the top line study that it's touting here is it saying percentage of Americans who say this, and they're breaking it out between all U.S. adults versus white evangelical Protestants. So our first number is what percentage of white evangelical Protestants approve of Trump's job performance, which is currently sitting at 69%. Given the tumultuous nature of politics here in the United States right now, and given the historically interesting presidency of Trump, not even more interesting than his first term, it definitely won't surprise you to find that a lot of evangelicals support Trump. Still, it can be very interesting to see a number like this and to see that even in the midst of all of this tumultuous turmoil kind of stuff going on, white evangelicals, his power base, if you will, they support him at a clip of 69%. At least the specific term is, do they approve of Trump's job performance? Now, before we move on with this, I want to make a few things very clear, okay? First, when you say approve of job performance, that can really be wide open. And you know that I give Christians a lot of shit. I give evangelicals a lot of shit, and they deserve it. But I'm going to try to be as balanced here as I can. And this is not about Adam hate Trump, all right? Adam does hate Trump, but this isn't about Adam hate Trump. This is more about looking at how religion, and specifically the evangelical flavor of religion in this country, colors the perspective that is brought to our politics now for the last 10 years or so. I mean, you can argue that the roots of this have been going back for decades, but specifically with the rise of Trump, how this has colored the politics. And I'm going to be as fair as I can be here and say that when you make a statement like, or a question like, do you approve of Trump's job performance? That can lead one to quantify it in any of a number of different ways. For example, you might think that the person in the White House today could be anyone, we'll just say theoretically. You could think that they have many moral, ethical, spiritual, personality kind of problems. But you might still think that in terms of the job of doing what a president does, you might still approve of what they are doing. In other words, you can approve of someone doing their job and not like the person. You can approve of someone doing their job or how they do their job and not like aspects of their personality. I mean, these are disparate thoughts that are more than possible for you to hold together. Now, I do think that when we get outside of the office that's as important as the presidency, it's a lot easier to hold those distinctions, right? Like you could be at work at the Department of Motor Vehicles, and maybe Joe is a drunk, and maybe you think he doesn't treat his wife very well, but he gets to work on time every day, and he sits at his desk and he processes the applications for the driver's licenses and everything. And you might say, you know what, Joe, I approve of how he does his job, even if you don't approve of his lifestyle, even if you don't approve of his moral choices. That is totally possible to hold in your mind. Now, I think it gets a little harder, or maybe a lot harder, to make those distinctions when you're talking about something as impactful and as inherently tied to morality and ethics as the leader of one of the most powerful countries in the entire world. But that being said, I'm trying to be reasonable here and say that whether you're an evangelical or not, whether you are a Republican or a Democrat or neither of the above, whether you hate politics or love it, it is not unreasonable with almost any presidency to look at the president and say, you know, maybe you don't approve of that person, but you think that you approve of their job performance. Still, there's basically no other group of people other than white evangelicals right now that would tell you that they approve of Trump's job performance at a 69% clip. That is a very high approval rating from almost any demographic group. So take that for what you will, whether or not they approve of his performance. We'll put that in a box and move on to the other questions because I think there's more interesting commentary around those. I think Jojo there says, it is mostly entertaining. Don't believe everything he says, though. If that's referring to Trump, I guess it depends on how you want to talk about entertainment. You know, watching the Dancing Bear may be entertaining. When the Dancing Bear is supposed to be your president and leader of the country, I don't know if that qualifies as entertainment anymore. But if that's what you're referring to, Jojo Freelancer, then maybe, I guess we can discuss that later. But so moving to the next percentage, 58% support. This is 58% of. Okay, he says that's not referring to Trump. So yeah, this is the danger of kind of like looking back and forth to the comments because I don't have like a moderator who sits here and goes through these. So like I have 3 screens, I have notes, I have like all this stuff going on. And sometimes I don't know what the hell's going on and trying to manage this live stream stuff, but we'll get there. So 58% of white evangelicals, again, support all or most of his plans and policies. Just like the first number, the 69%, this can be, I think, very misleading because when we say plans or policies, like if Trump gets up and spews lies for the next hour on an interview, that may not actually be affecting his plans or policies, right? If Trump was all over the Epstein files, I mean, I think that most people would think that's disgusting, but that may not have anything to do with his plans or policies. So I could sit here and go off on tangents and tell you about all these different ways that I think his plans or policies have distinct moral components to them. But again, I'm trying to not blow every single thing here out of proportion. And I'm trying to at least be reasonable and say that, you know, in my life, I have supported some politicians who I don't think were good people. So it's sometimes I've supported them because I thought that their plans or policies were solid or at least better than the opposition. So let's leave that one where it is as well. But it was this third point that really caught my attention. And I thought, oh, we got to talk. We got to have a little chat. See, between me and white evangelia in America. I like that word, evangelia, you know, like the diaspora of all white evangelicals all around. So, okay, yeah, he says if I want to comment, yeah, so me to comment on it, just tag me. That's fair, Jojo. So, with that regard, let's look at this next number. It says 40% of white evangelicals are extremely or very confident that Trump acts ethically in office. Okay, there is so much to unpack in this. There really is. So this illustrates to me something that, first of all, I want to talk about. I'd mentioned this in a few other videos, but in terms of my personal story, my testimony, if you will, this is something that broke me. As an American deconstructed former Christian looking at our politics. I'm not going to tell you that anything about Trump or the GOP is what made me an atheist, not at all. And I was an atheist before Trump ran for president the first time. I had been out, if you will, although I hate to take a term like that from the LGBT crowd, but I had been out as an atheist for, 4 or 5 years before Trump ran the first time. For the first time that he got elected. And there was a time period after I finally realized I'm not a Christian anymore. And I was an atheist, but I was something of a quiet atheist, you know? I didn't believe in God anymore. I mean, I never, I realized I don't believe in God. Let's put it that way. That's fine. But I didn't feel the need to talk to other people about it. I didn't feel the need to inject it into any other part of my life. I had friends who were Christians and friends who were, not, and friends who were of other religions. All that was fine. Even after I realized that I was no longer a Christian and that I no longer believed this shit, I still had this idea in my head that I wanted to foster about what Christianity means. I don't mean what the textbook definition is. I don't mean what it means, theoretically for the people who follow it. I mean, what do the thoughts and actions of Christians supposedly translate to in the real world? Because you can leave a theological system while still feeling like, you know what, that theology is a good thing. I mean, for me, a classic example of this is Buddhism. I'm not a Buddhist. I'm sure I never will be. I kind of investigated it a little bit when I was younger, but I think that Buddhism's a good thing, generally speaking. I'm sure that there are assholes out there that are Buddhists, just like there's assholes out there of every other religion, but I don't have nearly the same animosity towards Buddhism that I do towards Christianity. Now, maybe if I lived in a Buddhist country, maybe I'd have a different opinion. Maybe I'd be running a channel where I just talk about Buddhists all day and what assholes they are. I'm not sure. But my point is that I still held this idea before Trump's first election that, okay, Christians in general, even if I don't believe in their belief system, and even though I think a lot of it's full of holes and nonsensical, I still had this idea that Christianity, or the population of Christians as a whole, even in America, even in the Deep South, were generally good. They generally had the right ideas, and they were trying to do the right things. Hey, Susie, thanks for joining. And that colored how I looked at the religion going forward, even though I knew that I could never be a Christian again. And then Trump came along. And that's something that kind of broke me, because it's not that I was delusional about the impact or role that religion plays in society as a whole, or in America, or in the American Deep South, but I still wanted to believe that there was this idea that had been spouted for all of my life by Christians, that they held leaders to a certain standard, that this standard was supposedly higher than the standard for just average people. It was higher than the standard that you would hold for someone who's not a Christian, but they assumed that their leaders were Christian and that they held them to a higher standard. At least I think they wanted to. But then when this whole thing came around with Trump, I realized how deeply flawed and wrong that is. It's not, of course, that there aren't any good Christians out there. It's not that there aren't Christians who are appalled by Trump in general and by the turn that the GOP has taken under Trump in the last 10 or so years. But despite some good Christians being out there, I could not believe that Christians en masse could line up behind a guy like this. And everything that they wiped off the board for him, that they excused for him, are the same things that they would crucify someone else for, if that person was a Democrat, or if that person was black or a woman, or whatever. I mean, but primarily if they weren't a Democrat. The things that we as a society excuse now for Trump are things that I have seen in my lifetime. We have literally ended the political careers of many other people in the past. And yet it feels like not only do we wipe these things aside for Trump in general, but it feels like the people doing most of the wiping are the hardcore evangelical Christians, which blows my goddamn mind. I can't believe it to this day. I mean, I'm used to it now. I can't say I can't believe it anymore, because you'd have to be pretty stupid to be living in this country right now and to still say, I can't believe that at all. I mean, it's been written on the wall now for how long? So experience tells me that this is absolutely a thing and that it's not going away. But what I want to believe of people, and what I want to believe even of Christianity, yes, I still want to believe this of Christianity, is still makes me creates this incredible cognitive dissonance between what I think Christians are supposed to be and what they're actually playing out to under Trump. So this number, this caught my attention, getting back to the point of this, because for 40% of white evangelicals to say that they're extremely or very confident that Trump acts ethically in office, the first thing I have to ask myself, and I'm not being rhetorical when I say this, I'm not just assuming that I'm going to stick my own snarky answer in here. I really want to know, for white evangelia as a whole, what do they think ethical is? Like, when they hear the word ethical, how do they define that? Because if what Trump is doing in office right now, the way that he acts, I don't mean just his policies. I'm not talking even about ICE, although that's part of it. I'm talking about the way he speaks, the complete disregard for truth, the way that he just completely disregards women, the way that he has no problem spouting racist dog whistles all the time. I mean, at what point what would he have to say or do in order for white evangelicals to ever say that he's unethical? Now, I know you can say, well, according to this here, there are 60% of them that maybe think he's unethical right now. But still, how is it that 40% of white evangelicals look at what he says and does right now and they go, yep, that's ethical right there? I don't know what ethical is in their mind in order to take his actions and his words and his overall daily behavior and then somehow tell us, yes, that's ethical. And this is always a contrived thing, but I was like, okay, am I missing something here? What is ethical? It's not I mean, the practice of ethics and researching and stuff is an incredibly dense field. People spend careers going through ethics specific to different disciplines and such. But the word ethics isn't hard, people. All right, it's not that hard. That's why I went ahead and did the trite thing here and just pulled it up. Because what does ethical mean? It means relating to moral principles or the branch of knowledge that deals with these. In other words, similar is morally good or correct. So, I mean, morals are not ethics, but they're very synonymous. They're very close. And what do white evangelicals want to spend so much time proselytizing to us about and preaching to us about? Their morals, their objective morals, their divine morals, their morals that are given to them by their Creator. And yet, 40% of them look at Trump and think that he is ethical/moral. How does that work? I don't understand that. And I'm not trying to quibble over policies, okay? I'm not trying to say whether we should have stronger borders or fewer. I'm not trying to say whether we should bomb Iran or take leaders out of office in Venezuela or whatever. I mean, there's deep veins for discussion and debate there. But I'm actually not trying to have a political conversation here. I know we're talking about Trump a lot, right? To me, this is not about Trump. This conversation to me, if you're a Trump supporter, you probably already didn't click on the video or the live stream, or you've already clicked off. But I'm telling you, I'm not saying this because Trump bad. Okay? I mean, we could substitute, if we took his name off of it and took his exact words and his exact actions for the last 10 years and put the name John Doe on it and said he's a Democrat, we could have this same discussion. All right? Because I'm not right now talking about the evils of the GOP or the evils of the alt-right. I'm talking about how can you look at the avowed public behavior and words and actions of that man and say, oh yeah, he's ethical. And I would say this to anybody. I would say this to, if an atheist thinks he's ethical, I would say it if a Catholic thinks he's ethical, or Buddhist or whatever. But white evangelicals, to me, when I hear that term evangelical, I immediately think morality, not because I think that they're especially moral people. In fact, if anything, I feel that they, as a group, tend to have more moral deficiencies than most. But I immediately think morals because to me, that is how they try to brand themselves. They try to brand themselves as having this innate, divine, spiritual, objective morality that is handed down from their God man creator, and that they try to, and then they try to run those morals through the legal system the way that they interpret the morals. And they think that they are somehow acting ethically and morally in this regard. So if you told me that the Mormons had this particular association with Trump, and I know a lot of Mormons do, but that to me doesn't mean as much because although I know that Mormons can be preachy and have their own hangups, I don't even think of them in the same extreme bucket as white evangelicals in general. I know that minus the doctrinal issues, a lot of Mormons are actually quite evangelical in their own way too. But when I hear white evangelical, I'm thinking of traditional American Protestants, usually in the Deep South, and they will talk to you endlessly about their amazing morals. And then to hear that this comes back, the survey comes back that says that 40% of them, even to this day, will tell you that they're extremely or very confident that Trump acts ethically in office. Wow, man. Wow. It really creates this gaslighting distinction in my head, because if you can call what Trump says and does in office ethical, then that word means nothing to you. You can call anything ethical at this point. There is, and I know ethical is always going to be a subjective term, but at this point, language is starting to lose meaning. This is a Kafkaesque kind of, or a newspeak kind of Orwellian kind of phenomenon that we're talking about here. At least this is what I'm thinking of, where words no longer have the generally accepted meaning of the words, or even worse, the generally accepted meaning of the word is almost completely opposite of everything that you've learned growing up and you know, being a member of society. Suddenly, good is bad, up is down. It's the newspeak. It's Orwellian in nature. And to think that 40% of white evangelicals think that Trump is acting ethically tells me that I can't even have a conversation with those people about ethics, because we're literally not talking about anything in common. We're talking about two incredibly different concepts, because if that's what you call ethics, then we can't have a conversation about ethics. But it gets worse. Yes, Dale, it's absolutely a cult. I mean, I hate to overuse that term cult, because I know it's easy to say in a snarky way that, you know, Christianity is a cult or all religions are cults. I think that sometimes it's very unproductive to use that kind of language, because when you start applying it to systems that are across the world, I think we lose the generally accepted idea of what we think a cult is. Usually cults are pretty small, usually. But here's where it does feel much like a cult, because cults usually center around personality, right? The cult of personality. And I know that that term doesn't necessarily mean the same thing we're talking about here, but cults do tend to focus on charismatic leaders. And as much as I hate Trump, I have to admit he is in a certain respect, he's a very charismatic leader. The way he speaks. Hey, Ralph. So from that perspective, it feels cultish. But I can't sit here, even as much as I rail against evangelicism, I can't call that a cult. and even, we want to say Trump's a cult. I mean, yeah, maybe, but he had a majority of voters vote for him last year, a year and a half ago. At what point does it no longer become a cult and it just becomes your country sucks? I'm not sure. But here's the part of this that I want to hammer home, and this is what I find to be the most damning aspect of this survey here from Pew. It's one thing to say that white evangelicals at a 40% clip say that he's acting ethically. But even in that same survey, it said that 69% of them approve of his job performance. Think about that gap right there. 69%, which is basically 7 out of 10, approve of his job performance. 40% or 4 out of 10, only that many think that he's acting ethically. This means that even amongst his happy sycophants, his bootlicks, the white evangelicals, 3 out of 10 of them don't think he's acting ethically, and they still support him. The fuck? How do you do that? And going back to the caveats that I threw in the middle or in the beginning of this live stream, I want to point something out really quick. Because again, I know that you can support someone despite having problems with their ethics. But for the white evangelical set, this feels incongruous to me. It feels like a ridiculous discontinuity to say that 7 out of 10 white evangelicals support or approve of his job performance, but only 4 out of those 10 actually think that he's acting ethically. So this means that there's a lot of white evangelicals out there right now who, in a private moment or in an anonymous Pew Research survey, will tell you, 6 out of 10, will tell you he's not acting ethically. But at least half of those people who say he's not acting ethically still approve of his job performance. I mean, if we took other demographics that weren't overtly religious or devoutly religious, if we said, the American Pipe Fitters Union, 7 out of 10 approve of his job performance, but only 4 out of 10 say that he's acting ethically, I'd say, well, okay, that's fine, because I don't associate the American Pipe Fitters Union with voting specifically on ethical grounds. Now, of course, I don't agree with a lot of the ethical choices that the evangelicals will make, but I usually assume that they think that they're voting on moral or ethical grounds. And yet, according to this survey, that's not true, because there are a lot of them out there who don't think he's acting ethically, and yet they still support him. They still approve of his job performance. That's mind-blowing to me. In theory, to me, for a group like evangelicals, I would think that there should never be that big of a gap between the two numbers. I know it's never going to be perfect, right? You're never going to have exactly the same number of people who approve of his job performance while also saying that he acts ethically. There's always going to be some delta. But I would have thought that amongst evangelicals, the delta would be very small. That if they don't think he's acting ethically, then they would not approve of his job performance, and vice versa. But clearly that's not the case. How does that happen? I mean, the only way that I know it can happen is if evangelicals don't care nearly as much about ethics as they like to have you believe. Now, in the spirit of being charitable again, there are other reasons to support your political leaders or vote for certain leaders without necessarily approving of their ethics. I'll give you an anecdote on this. Before Trump was elected the first time, there was a guy I used to work for. He was a CTO, and I was no longer working for him at that time, but we remained friends. He's a guy I respected a lot. Very smart, very funny, bright business mind, good leader. And I learned before the first Trump election that this person, his name is Angel, he was a Trump supporter. And it really blew my mind because I always thought Angel was just more logical than that. And because he and I were friends, he heard that I was baffled by this, and he was a pretty forthright kind of guy. He invited me to lunch, and we sat down and had a lunch. And he told me at that time, he said, it's all about the Supreme Court justices. And you have to remember, this was before Trump's first term. And Angel wasn't he wasn't some luminary or visionary, prophetic guy. I mean, he wasn't the first one to come up with this observation, but he, in retrospect, was absolutely right that if you get a majority on the Supreme Court, a supermajority, especially a dogmatic supermajority on the court, then we are seeing in real time, and we will be continuing to see for decades what that can do. It's far more powerful than electing a president or electing, a majority in the House or the Senate. It's scary what it can do. And we're going to continue to reap those disgusting fruits now for quite some time. So I tell that anecdote to say that Angel told me he thought Trump was disgusting, but he was absolutely voting for Trump for this reason. And that's okay. That's okay because, I don't like it, but I understand it. It makes sense. If you are a single issue person also is another great example of this. Maybe the only reason that you vote is you just want to vote for whichever president is going to do the most to try to ban abortion. And even to this day, it's not fully banned in the country. So people that are on that train will tell you there's still more work to do. So you could vote for Trump and say, hey, even though he's not ethical, I guess this is why you're on the Trump train. But I want to harp again on the fact that if you are an evangelical and you want to preach to others about the sanctity of your amazing, objective fairy tale morals, and you want to tell us about how these morals and ethics from your God should be written into our law, and yet you don't think that the president himself is ethical, how in the hell do you square those two ideas? See, the practical side of saying, well, I support a leader for this, for this one objective that he's going to do, or because he's going to attack Iran and I hate Iranians or something, to me, that only goes so far. To then continue to say, with all that has transpired in his first term and now his second, and then to still say that you support his performance, but oh yeah, by the way, he's not ethical. I mean, you've already won the Supreme Court battle. I guess you can always get more, if the next three liberals, resign or die off of the court, I guess you could hammer home that majority even more. But the Supreme Court battle is basically won. You have a supermajority right now, and it's not just a supermajority of people that lean to the right. It's a supermajority of people that are dogmatically in favor of anything GOP and will write opinions that contradict other opinions they've written just because it pleases the current GOP objective at the time. You've won that battle. I would say largely you're winning your immigration stuff. I know it doesn't feel like that if you just want to see DHS running wild and ICE running wild throughout the country, but they're already terrorizing the country. That's been largely won. So what else do you think you're doing? But if you're an evangelical, I guess it doesn't matter that you don't think he's ethical. You're still going to support him anyway. Now, there are some other ways that you can look at this. Some of this just comes back, unfortunately, to human psychology. Sadly, the way that we reason about almost anything, and this isn't a GOP alt-right thing. Liberals do the same thing. We make decisions often based off of insufficient evidence or emotional evidence. And then once we make that decision, everything thereafter goes toward justifying that decision. So you vote for someone. Maybe you thought he was going to be great. Maybe you thought he wasn't going to do anything unethical in office. And then he got into office and he starts doing all the unethical stuff that he was doing before he was in office, but now he just has more power. But there is this sunk cost fallacy that goes into this for people, which sounds weird because you could say, well, once you voted for someone, there is no more cost to you, but there is still a cost. There's this emotional cost. You're emotionally invested in the people that you have voted for good and bad. And once that happens, you know, Trump himself famously said that he could, you know, go to walk down Broad Street or something and, you know, shoot someone in broad daylight and Broadway. I think he said he could walk down Broadway and shoot someone in broad daylight and his supporters would still support him. And that's very true. But at this point, I don't know if, I mean, I know it's true because I don't know what he could possibly do that would get white evangelicals off of his train, you know, off of thinking that this is who they have to support regardless of what he does. So let's look at some more numbers here because this isn't the only part of the survey. It's there's several different sections. So we'll go through these here quickly once I wet my whistle. Okay, sorry, that's what you get with live streams. Sometimes I just have to throw a drink down for real quick. All right, so they did show this. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I thought it was worth bringing it up because it's in the study here. It says compared with early 2025, fewer white evangelicals now have confidence that Trump acts ethically in office. So the numbers are trending down, which is yay, I guess. But I find it hard to put too much stock in this, especially the first one. You know, the first one that goes from 66 down to 58 is the number of white evangelicals, or the percentage, that support all or most of Trump's plans and policies. Well, that may look encouraging, but it's really not. It's only gone down 8%. And the simple fact is that almost all presidents lose popularity, even amongst their own party, during midterms, you know, in the middle of their term. So I don't know how this compares historically to other presidents, but I can't really get too excited about the fact that in the last year and change, the number has gone down amongst white evangelicals from 66 to 58. I mean, yeah, it's great that you're losing some support amongst your bootlicks, but it's not that much support. And this is actually pretty common for any president. Also, you know, the one that I'm really focusing on, the one that says they're extremely or very confident that Trump acts ethically in office, has gone down by more. It's gone down by 15 percentage points, from 55 down to 40. But again, that just feels like too little too late at this point. You know, you want to preach to me about ethics and you want to tell me about how we're supposed to write your morals and your ethics into our laws. And yet there's still 40% of you that are telling me that you're extremely or very confident that he acts ethically in office. And look at where this started. You know, basically it says that in February of last year, there was still this weird gap because, you know, how is it that 66% approved of the job he was doing, but only 55% thought that he was acting ethically? That's not as big a gap as 58 to 40. But it still tells me that there's a weird disconnect between the shit that comes out of your mouth that you want to preach to us and the way that you actually feel about this man or the GOP or the direction of the country or what have you. But outside of anonymous surveys, you hardly ever hear anyone acknowledging this gap, because I think most of these people that are telling you that they support his policies would not be as likely to tell you that they think he's acting unethically if they were in a public forum amongst random people who may or may not support them. Because it's harder to be honest in that regard if you feel like you might be judged or attacked for this incongruity that I'm pointing out, which is that you support his job performance, but you don't think he's ethical. So, okay, moving on. They also break this out by religious group. Yes, it says, even Tim Scott, the only black Republican senator, finally thought Trump was racist. Any response to the Lion King parody tweet? It's like, and I love that you put this comment here, because this is going to feed into something that this is going to be essentially the next point, the key point I want to bring up in this little discussion here today. So this will talk about, to some extent, about things like race. So then they came out with this. This is white Protestants and religious nuns have become less likely to support all or most of Trump's agenda. And there's a similar one down here, which is the confidence in Trump's ethics has declined in several religious groups. So both of these, as you can see, break out this by religious group. The difference is that this is who is supporting his agenda, and this is who's behind his ethics. Okay, so in terms of the agenda, of course, the white evangelicals, no shocker here, are right at the top, right? Yeah, it's gone down. It's only gone down from 66 to 58%. Then we have white evangelical Protestants. Then we have white Catholics. Then we have white Protestants, not evangelical. Are you catching a trend here? Is there anything that's correlating with you at all as we read through that? Then we have the general U.S. adult population, which has dropped in his confidence for his agenda from 35 to 27. Then we have Hispanic Catholic. Then we have religiously unaffiliated. Then we have Black Protestant. All right. Put a pin in that, because we'll also look here at the numbers for people that still support his ethics. White evangelical Protestants have been taking a fairly good nosedive here, but still 40%, as we've already discussed. The white evangelical Protestants. Then there's the white Catholics. Then there's the white Protestant, not evangelical. Are you sensing a trend here? Is there anything about this that seems to be correlating? Then we have U.S. adults. Then we have Hispanic Catholic. Then we have religiously unaffiliated. Then we have Black Protestant. So there's a few things I want to point out here. I mean, some of them I don't think I need to point out, because I think you guys are already seeing the trend, but I'm going to point them out anyway, because you know what? It's my live stream and I'm talking and I'm talking and I'm talking. So obviously, even when we get out of evangelicals, the clear trend here is that white folk are like, yay, you know, I mean, even though there are a lot of white people that don't like Trump. Okay. I mean, it's not like it's hard to find white people that don't like Trump. But if you tell me, hey, I know someone who's a Trump supporter, I immediately have a picture in my head. And that picture is not of someone with a lot of melanin. It's not of someone with a deep, dark, savory tan. No. It's someone that's as pasty or more than I am. Yeah. So even if we get out of the evangelical set, it's still the white folk who are like, yay, Trump. And it's all the brown folk who are like, yeah, I don't know about that. I got to give props here. Notice at the bottom of both of these, the Black Protestants approved of his agenda only by 8% before, and now approve of it by 6%. I guess you can argue there wasn't really a lot of room to drop a lot, right? And then when it's talking about his ethics, the Black Protestants started at 7%, and they're still at 7%, which tells me a couple things. First of all, I don't care how bad someone is and how aligned they are against certain groups. You're always going to find some people who will support them anyway. Okay. I had friends of mine in Jacksonville, at least a couple, who were gay and supported Trump, and it blew my damn mind. I was like, how can you possibly support this man? But, you know, it doesn't matter how much a leader goes out against a certain group of people. There will always be some people in that group who still like, no, I think I like the guy. Blacks in general are certainly one of those types of groups. He does not poll well, has never polled terribly well amongst African Americans, amongst Hispanics, amongst any people of color. Although famously, the Latinx vote did trend higher in his favor with the last election. And that was a key factor, and certainly in areas like Florida. But one thing I get from this is that, at least when it comes to evaluating Trump, blacks as a whole are some very principled people, because to me, this graph kind of says, how principled are you? Because it's nice to know that your number here went from 55 to 40 if you're a white evangelical. But like I've already said at length, if you can look at what Trump's doing now and tell me that he's ethical, I still don't think you really know what you're talking about. But to me, being principled in some respect could be translated as being consistent in your perceptions, right? You know, a principled person will always have a certain prism that they view the world through. And unless something changes radically about that world, they, if they are truly principled, will have the same or a similar reading of things last week or last month or last year as they do today. Again, the world can change drastically, but usually the fundamental underlying principles of ethics and society and what makes things good or bad, they don't usually change that much. So the fact that Black Protestants in both of these categories, this one changed only from 8 to 6%, and this one didn't change at all. It's like, yeah, only 7% of us liked you before, and only 7% of us like you now. Like, that's consistency right there. Again, you could argue that maybe that's just because they were so low to begin with that there was nowhere else to go at that point. You know, at a certain point, you've kind of hit rock bottom. But I have a certain respect for Black Protestant culture here, that they didn't like him in the first place and they don't like him now. So that's good on you, Black Protestants. I am feeling that. That's pretty cool. I also want to point out something here, and I know that I can be probably accused of overgeneralizing here, but I don't think it is an accident at all that ICE and many of the other unethical practices undertaken by our president and our administration, of course, have disproportionate effects on non-white communities. Now, the easy answer for that, the answer that actually doesn't just apply to America, unfortunately, it applies to much of humanity, no matter where they are in the world. The easy answer to that is that, yeah, duh, it's called racism, and racism is everywhere. There's probably not a society in the world where racism simply doesn't exist. There are places where it's not nearly as bad in terms of being a societal problem, but if there are people there, then there's racism there on some level. But aside from the general statement that people are assholes and there are a lot of racists in the world, and racism always kind of rears its ugly head no matter how hard you try to get rid of it, the other more practical way to look at this is that, of course, the administration is racist. Of course, the policies are disproportionately negatively affecting people of color, because look at the people who support him dogmatically. They white folk. And if we're going to break this down to a very sad but simple equation, you build a base. Sometimes your base is built on your party. Sometimes it's based on your religion. Sometimes your base is built on the color of your skin. And of course, political bases are more complex than being one demographic factor, right? There could be many different factors that make up your particular political base. But even though I give white evangelicals a lot of shit, the simple fact is that we could broaden this and just say, what the hell's up with white folk in general? Now, in each of these, whether we're looking at white evangelical Protestants or non-evangelicals or Catholics, there is a majority of people, even a majority of white people, who do not think that he's ethical. So I'm not trying to say that all white people are behind Trump. I'm not trying to say that all white people are racist or anything like that. But I am saying that if you wanted to look at this, like a chart like this, from a very cold, calculating political perspective, do you want to favor the white folk, or do you want to spend a lot of time and effort putting in policies that aid people of color. I mean, the sad part is that there's a basic political calculation there that, to be fair, I think all politicians, in this country at least, for the last 250 years, have made that calculation to some extent, whether they want to admit it or not. Even if they say that they are the most progressive presidential candidate who's ever come about, even if they say that they love people of all colors and they don't see race and all that other crap, there is still a calculation that everybody does. But I think that the way that this administration goes about it, it seems to be, well, far too often that they're saying the quiet part out loud, that they're overtly steering their policies in a way that helps the people that are in these top groups that still, despite his effery, maintain the greatest possible support for him, and specifically does not do much to help the people that are at the bottom who are saying, yeah, we don't support this crap. So it's cold, it's calculated, but on a certain level, on a disgusting racist level, I understand it. I don't support it, and it shouldn't be part of the equation, but I think we'd be stupid to say that it's not, on some level, overtly part of the equation. All right, so those are the notes that I had today for this particular Pew Research study. Feel free to look it up yourself. But we're going to get into a few other things here that don't have to do with the Pew Research study. I'm just going to use this as a platform just to kind of spew some other stuff. So if you only wanted to hear about why white evangelicals can't seem to understand the word ethics, then maybe this is the time when you drop off. But we're going to get into some viewer comments here. So I'm going to kind of turn it into an ad hoc episode of God's Troll Army as well. And if there's anything in particular that you want me to address, drop me something in the comments if I can see it. Obviously, if you give me a super chat, those are easier for me to see. And I'm not saying that as a plea for money. I'm just saying they show up, brighter or something. But it's not like you have to put in a super chat for me to see your comment or something. It's just hard because, like I said, I'm juggling here. I'm looking through a few different things. Also, let me make sure by looking at my software that I believe we're still actively, yes, we're still in the process, right? Oh, I just realized what happened before too. When I first launched the broadcast, I know why it kept looping, because I didn't have the audio off on that. That's interesting. I'm learning things, people. Like little by little, I'm learning things. I'm figuring it out. So, you guys are unfortunately. Oh, I forgot to bring this up. I wanted to bring this up because, I just typed in evangelical church service in Google and looked at in Google image search and looked at the images that come back. And I know this will shock all of you, but most of the images that come back, there ain't a lot of people there with melanin. There's a lot of people there that look like me or whiter. So I don't think you had to see the illustration to really understand that. And I do understand. I'm not trying to just speak in nothing but ridiculous generalities. I know that if you walk into an evangelical church sermon, even here in the Deep South, if the church is big enough, or if the church is in certain, more diverse neighborhoods, you'll see some Black folk there. You'll see some Latinx people. You'll see some Asians. But generally speaking, if I say to you that I went to an evangelical church service last Sunday, and if you start picturing that scene in your head as people are worshiping, who are you thinking is in the pews? I don't think you are assuming that there's a whole bunch of people of color and a whole bunch of skin tones there. I think you're picturing in your head by default a whole lot of pale ass people just like me. I don't think that's by accident. All right, so I was going through that, was I doing? Okay. Bear with me. I'm switching gears. And now that I switch gears, I'm like, wait, where's the gear? So here's what I'm going to do. I wanted to just look at a few comments that I thought were cool. Not specifically, they're not comments about Trump or racism or anything like this. So yeah, that's a pretty pale audience. Yeah, there's a whole lot of white folk in evangelical church. Isn't a black church a thing? Is there some self-segregating? So that's an interesting question. It may not be as obvious to those who aren't in the United States. Yes, there are quote unquote black churches. There's at least one denomination of, and I'm going to screw this up, I believe it's a specific denomination of Methodists that are known as being a black denomination. Most quote unquote black churches will not say on the door that it's a black church, just like the white churches don't say white church. So it's usually an implicit segregation. Church services in America, they tend to, in my humble opinion, they tend to go by two different ideas. Especially in the North, where I grew up, the mix of racial mixture of any given church was almost exclusively given to the neighborhood where the church was, right? So you could say, maybe we think of Baptists as being white. I'm just throwing that out. I don't know what the numbers are, Baptist registration, but I'm just saying, let's just assume you're thinking that Baptists are white. And yet, if you go to a city in Milwaukee and you go to a Baptist church where the neighborhood is 50% black and 50% white, then there's a good chance that the service might be 50% black and 50% white in terms of the congregants. So in that respect, I will say that geography plays a huge part of it. But in certain denominations and in certain parts of the country, I'll let you figure out what that is. There are also times when you might have two churches very close to each other. Sometimes they're even the exact same denomination, but one is like where the black folk go and one's where the white folk go. Again, it's not usually by any overt thing that they've put on the banner. It's usually a very self-segregated thing. And that, of course, has deep roots in Jim Crow. So I'm not going to say that Northern churches are the perfect egalitarian idea of equality, because that's not true. Northern churches or Western churches, there's still segregation that happens, self-segregation in church services all over America. But without going down a huge rabbit hole, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the history of the South and Jim Crow, but after I'll just give you a quick synopsis to say that after slavery ended, after the Civil War ended, and the North won, then the South went through a period of, the North was initially trying to impose these laws that would make sure that everyone was equal, at least on some level. And the South wasn't having it at all. So they went, and the process was called Reformation. Or Reconstruction. Reconstruction. And in theory, after the Civil War, the idea of Reconstruction was going to be that we're going to rebuild the South and we're going to make it, better. We're going to stop all this racism and everything. But the South wasn't having it, and they fought back very hard by imposing a long series of laws and social customs that, while the black population of the South was technically free, they did everything that they could to ensure that they weren't free, that they were oppressed, that they were segregated, that they were in the back of the bus and they couldn't, sit at the lunch counter, and they couldn't use the same water fountain, and they couldn't apply for the same jobs, and blah, blah, blah. All these different ways that they ensured. And to be clear, some of these racist traditions absolutely took place in the North. They absolutely took place in the West. I mean, these things I'm talking about were not only confined to the South, but the Jim Crow laws, the laws that really overtly tried to ensure that people of color would never even get close to a position of equality. Those were most famous in the South, where they put these in place. And I'll get off that subject just because it's a whole rabbit hole. But that segregation that, we used to have segregated schools. There was a black school and a white school. And of course, the white school had more money and more services and all this. That segregation absolutely played out to church services as well. So remember I said like the neighborhood makes a big part of the mix of who goes to the church. Well, in a lot of American cities, the poorest, most crime-ridden neighborhoods are hugely populated by African Americans or other minorities. Not, as the racists will tell you, because those people are more prone to crime or poverty or whatever, but because the policies that this country put in place for hundreds of years ensured that people of color had the least opportunity, and they ended up living in the least desirous parts of town because that was the cheapest. So then, yeah, if you open a church in that neighborhood, it's going to be mostly black, regardless of the denomination, because it's the poor part of town. And unfortunately, even to this day, many of our larger cities have destitute areas of town, which also correlate very highly with being minorities. And again, that's, the racists will tell you, well, that's because they're prone to crime or some crap like that. But it's because of a long legacy of economic and financial oppression. Yes, annoying newsletter says Reconstruction was commenced by long-term stationing of Union troops in the South to enforce policies. Yeah. And you could imagine for the southern states, which were already very butthurt, of course, about losing the war, and then they had to suffer the further indignity of seeing their slaves released. It was also seen as a massive indignity to have anything imposed upon them by the North, or to have Union troops stationed anywhere around them. So it was just one more factor that made the South even more rebellious. That's probably a loaded word to use, but it fed into all that. So that being said, let's get into some, I wanted to get into some comments here. And let's see. Is that showing up properly on my screen? It is. I've figured out the best way to pull it, so I have keywords I can use to actually search for the things I wanted to say. Is this also? It is. And the way I'm going to do this is that when I do God-free Bible study, I'm usually answering the people that have really stupid takes. In this case, I'm going to do a little of both. I'm going to do the bad takes and good takes at the same time. So I don't want anyone to think like, wow, he brought up my comment. Like I thought he was only saying, bringing up the horrible stuff. But why is it? See, I had, because here, apply that. There we go. So this one is recently from Positivity, who's in our chat right now. But I thought it'd be fun to highlight this because this was based off the latest episode of Godfrey Bible Study. And it says, it says that Yahweh is the God of the whole world. But what about all those people that are getting evicted? The fact that their heads don't explode with cognitive dissonance is the real miracle of the Bible. If you watch Godfrey Bible Study, of course, you know what he's talking about. But I just thought this would be fun to bring up in the live stream tonight. Because one of the things that I've been harping on with Godfrey Bible Study, and I just don't think that this gets brought up nearly enough in Christianity, even when you watch like apologetics channels, on YouTube, you don't see this brought up nearly enough, that this being Yahweh. And I know that most Christians don't even think about Yahweh anymore. They think about Jesus. But if you follow the Trinity logic, then it's the same thing. Sort of. Okay, we'll leave that one alone for now, right? But is so disingenuous to me that when you read through, especially the Pentateuch, right, which we just recently finished and now going into Joshua for Godfrey Bible study, there's never even a suggestion that God is the God of all the people. Now, it does say in several places, even early on, that God is, God of everything. Hitting my lights. God of everything, right? Or God of the world, or God of, but then it goes on to make it explicitly, painfully clear that God doesn't give a shit about the Canaanites. He doesn't care about the Egyptians. He doesn't care what happens to the Jebusites or the Moabites or anyone. All he cares about is the Israelites. And if you stop the internal critique, right? If we're not just looking at the Bible and saying, wow, look at the stupidity of your book. If we just look at it from a anthropological level, this makes total sense, because basically every group back then, they had their own god or gods that they created or that they believe came into existence or whatever. And they were pretty unapologetic about saying, yeah, this is our God. This is the God that works for us and, battles for us and all that. And Yahweh does the exact same thing. Yahweh doesn't care about the other populations. And it also puts a lot of the disgusting violence and commandments from the Bible into a more reasonable context. By reasonable, I don't mean that the commandments become good, but they become understandable. If you realize that it's truly a book of us versus them. Us is the Israelites and everyone else is the them. And us is Yahweh and all the other gods is the them. I'm not saying that excuses genocide, but it's easier for me to look at it from this old-timey perspective of, okay, this is an old ancient people talking about their God, who of course fights for them and loves them and, is on their side, because no one ever creates a God that's on the enemy's side. I don't think there's ever been a population that created a God and then said, oh yeah, he's against us. I mean, granted, when you read the Old Testament, there are plenty of places in the Holy Text where they say that God essentially punished the Israelites by allowing other countries to overtake them. But they still always have this narrative that, oh, but God's really on our side. God loves us. From that perspective, it makes sense. But to take all of that when you read the Old Testament and then to try to extrapolate that into this idea that now Yahweh loves everyone and God is all loving and perfectly just. And how does that even square? How do you, if you have any Canaanite blood in your ancestry, if you have any Egyptian blood in your ancestry, any Assyrian blood, Babylonian blood, how do you square that with the fact that the Bible specifically and the biblical God specifically was against you and your people, and now he's changed his mind? Now he's everyone's God? How does that work? And Christians never even want to, talk about that or think about that. They want to hold on to the Old Testament partially out of necessity, because there are tie-ins between the Old Testament and the New. So I think they feel like they can't abandon it. And they also want to cherry pick from it as they see fit. But they don't want to acknowledge the fact that basically for the entire Old Testament, Yahweh only cared about the Israelites. I mean, literally only cared. Couldn't care less what happened to the even though a lot of the laws. I brought this up. I think the first time I mentioned this was in Exodus, because when they start reading these laws, sometimes they say things that that you can't do to your neighbor. And when I was growing up as, young little Christian Adam, you hear neighbor, you're thinking, well, of course, literally it means your neighbor, like whoever lives next to you. Even at a young age, I understood it wasn't confined to just the people on your block. I assumed we were talking like in this spiritual sense, like everyone's my neighbor, everyone's my brother. But if you read the Old Testament carefully, you start to realize in many, many places where the term neighbor doesn't just mean your brother or humanity. It means Israelites. This is how you were to treat the Israelites. And in some cases, they're even explicit in saying, this is what you can do to your neighbor or can't do to your neighbor, and this is what you can do to everyone else. Meaning, you need to have, in some cases, two sets of codes, the way that you can treat your fellow Israelites, and then there aren't many rules about how you can treat everyone else, because even the rules where they try to say that you're supposed to treat other people good, you're only treating them good because it hurts your neighbors. So, for example, all of the rules about treating aliens well, which evangelicals couldn't care less about, but all of these rules about treating aliens well, why are you supposed to treat aliens well? One is because it grows your own tribe. Two is because these are people who used to be in the other country. So, like in a simple mathematical way, everybody that you have that comes to your country from there, in a friendly way, is kind of hurting your neighbors at the same time. So of course you shouldn't treat the aliens like shit. They're helping to grow your community and your ultimately your military power. But anyway, I will get off of that one and move on to our next comment. Second while I search this one up. If you wonder why I'm doing this, if there's any downside to YouTube system, it's like there's no good way to save a comment. So if I want to reply to these things live, almost have to, write them in a separate document or something, because otherwise it's really hard to find them. Now in this case, it pulled out too many. Hold up. Okay, there we go. So this one I wanted to kind of bring up. This is from DHW. His username is, his full username is DHW1764. You guys can see it there on screen. But it's listed on his profile as DHW. But these are clips that were taken out from my commentary on science and how conservatives deal with science. And this was his response. I also like to be told the truth. How many times have we been lied to by the climate scientists? Of course, there's double quotes there because, they're not really climate scientists. They're just climate scientists. It's like, oh, sure. Every decade, they have produced a world-ending event, given a date for that event to take place. And then when that event comes and is gone, a new date and a new crisis is produced. What alternate reality are people living in? Maybe he's exaggerating, I don't know, but how deluded do you have to be to actually believe this crap? Please, and I just mean this rhetorically, although, you can put it in the comments or something, but can someone show me one event in any decade where the climate scientist, you need the quotes around that, gave a date for a world-ending event that was going to take place, and then when that event comes and is gone, a new date and a new crisis is produced? I mean, if you wanted to be really generous with this, you could say that the year 2000 people, there were some people who were being all doom and gloom about that, but those weren't climate scientists. Those are wayward IT professionals that were trying to get more consulting gigs before the millennium. And even then, I mean, there was some overblown stuff there, but I still don't know if I saw anyone with a shred of credibility who was actually saying that there was going to be a world-ending event from year 2000. It's just that people overplayed the impact of the coding problem that was at hand there. But there has never been a time when a climate scientist has produced a world-ending event. Understand what it's saying there. They're not even saying predicting. They're saying produced a world-ending event. Like, they're all sitting there in their labs at the universities like, what can we come up with next? we need a new world-ending event. I mean, this sounds like MCU. I think he has the MCU and climate Scientology. It's not Scientology. I'm just saying that jokingly, but I think that he thinks that there's no distinction between the MCU and climate science. Then he goes on to say, the fact is we are never leaving this earth and it is not forever. I mean, we'll go on with this. The planet is finite and so are we. We will never live in space, ever. We will never travel to another planet and proliferate. This planet will die, and so will we. We need to stop acting like there's a choice. That's interesting because I will freely admit that the prospect of space travel, even to the nearest star, is at least incredibly daunting. And I will tell you that despite my love of science fiction, whether or not we can ever get a manned mission to any planet outside of our own solar system, I think is still very much up for grabs, because the tactical realities of space travel, the mind-blowing distances that you have to travel, even the nearest star, in terms of the number of light years away, which means you would have to travel at the speed of light that many years to get there, and you can't travel at the speed of light. I don't know if that's ever going to happen. Now, of course, science fiction, talks about things like generational ships. These could happen, and people like to talk about wormholes and warp drives. I mean, most of that, to say it's theoretical is usually giving it far too much credit than it's worth. Usually it's beyond theoretical. Nevertheless, I like to hold out hope that we might someday get to another solar system, but that's not even what his thing here says. He says we'll never get to another planet. I mean, granted, if we're talking about something on the span of the life of our star, our sun, then it is reasonable to ask, what's the point of planet jumping to Mars or to Venus? I mean, I know Venus is a hellscape. I don't think we could ever live on Venus, but maybe like one of the moons of Jupiter or Saturn, that we've talked about. Maybe we could set up life on some of those moons. Well, once our star burns out and goes nova, I mean, for a certain period there, it's going to expand to the point where it will basically turn the Earth into a crisp. And even if you were outside that zone, then how much good does it mean to be a planet or two beyond there? I don't know. I think that living on other planets is something to be seen as a stepping stone. Like it's an engineering challenge to solve that tells you that you're ready to start thinking about what it would take to get to another solar system. And obviously we have the whole problem of trying to figure out even which solar system to target, because right now we're finding the signature of other similar type of planets, M-class planets, but we still don't know if those planets would in any way support life as we think of it. But it's quite confident to say that we're never going to live outside this planet. Okay, I mean that's okay. You can have that viewpoint. He may not be wrong. And then it says there's about another 100 billion reasons to ensure that the climate nonsense stops. Climate nonsense. Wow. Every single one of these arguments is intended to create a money flow, nothing else. They never come to fruition, and they never will. Beyond the simple fact that this person has completely erroneously characterized climate scientists as creating world-ending events, which they have never done. In fact, if anything, the problem with climate science is that it's not, at least in any type of foreseeable term, a world-ending event. It would be easier to get someone or everyone behind the idea that a asteroid is seen, it's tracked, it's massive, and it's in 10 years, it's going to literally slam into the Earth, because that would feel much more tangible to people to say, okay, we've found the giant rock. We've tracked it. We know where it's going. We know it's on course. And now we have to solve it. We have to find some way to send it off course or blow it up or whatever. That would be easier from a science action perspective to get people behind, because you would have a real well, climate change is real, but you would have a very tangible, easy to understand short-term problem that you could get people behind. The problem with climate science isn't that they're producing a new world-ending event every decade. It's that they're warning people about a trend that we have clearly defined, but even we don't, and by we, I mean, I'm not a scientist, but even the best scientists don't understand what the full impact will be for the planet. But the trend is, if you don't believe in the trend, it's because you just don't care about the data and you will not educate yourself. You have refused to educate yourself, because if you educate yourself even a little bit, you will see that the data is consistent and it's voluminous. They have been tracking the warming of the planet now. We've known about it in terms of scientific papers and building consensus as early as like the mid to late 50s. Now, obviously, I'm not saying everyone in the science community was on board then, but they've been tracking this. And of course, now we have a lot of data that goes back before then, so we can confirm it even further. But we first started realizing, I think it was somewhere around the 50s, that got kind of sidetracked in the public sphere because there was the famous thing from Time in the 70s where they said we were going to have like a little ice age, which the author of that paper has said, or that article has said, he wishes he'd never done that, because it was just a blip of data that was only, parroted by a handful of scientists, and it was completely against the overriding trend that everyone was already tracking at that point. And if you don't believe me on this, do some research on this. You'll see that some of the first scientists who really understood that the planet's warming, and it's warming far faster than it ever has in history, those scientists were working for the oil companies. Like Exxon, they had scientists that were ringing the alarm inside the company back to like the 60s. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean that the company as a whole took massive action on it, but they were doing a lot of research on this, and they were ringing the alarm bells inside the company, at least very early on. But there were other organizations well outside of the oil industry who were already understanding and tracking this global warmth as global warming well before the current couple decades. But the moral of that story is science illiteracy is real, people. It's very real. Unfortunately, it's not going anywhere anytime soon. And that's why I wanted to highlight something like this, because even though I don't know how much good it does in this scary world, but somebody should feel the need sometimes to point out the stupid. Let's look at next comment here. So I assume this person is a programmer like me. It says compiler error, or compiler, which should be like compiler error. I would like to think that programmers are smarter than the average bear, but not always. This was, again, replying to a snippet that I had from my broader video about conservatives in science. He says, your argument is reductive and based on the premise of emergency. Not everyone trusts climate scientists because of the biased, paid-for research and the fact that we have only been collecting records for 200 years when the Earth has climate cycles lasting thousands of years. And the fact that we have been told it is an emergency for 60 years now. And the fact that no matter what we do, China still nullifies all our efforts combined. You are missing so many parts of a complex piece, but sure, conservatives are the problem because you can't actually argue a point that stands on the complex foundation. I love how he quotes here, conservatives are the problem, even though I never said that. I didn't say it in the snippet. I didn't say it in the broader video. But, never mind the facts. Never mind the fact that you want to put words into my mouth because that makes your point better somehow. Sure. But on top of that, I love how he says this is reductive and then throws out a whole shit ton of misinformation. He says no, not everyone trusts climate scientists because of the biased paid for research. All research is paid for. Now, I do understand that sometimes it's paid for by an industry group who wants a certain result. And it is right to look at such reports with an added degree of skepticism. Scientists do this, all right? If you think that scientists themselves never look at who is sponsoring research, then you just have your head shoved right up your ass. Go ahead, apply cynicism to a research report, to a study, especially if it's paid for by someone who wants that result. But this is why science exists. It's called peer review, people. If the oil industry pays for a report that will say that oil is good and climate science isn't real, there's nothing theoretically wrong with that. I admit it causes potential headaches in terms of conflicts of information. But this is largely what the scientific process is for. If you pay me, if the oil industry pays me to do a study that says climate science doesn't exist, then no one will care about that paid for research unless I have the scientific credentials to back it up, unless I know how to submit a true scientific paper, unless that paper passes peer review from other scientists who aren't in the oil, cabal and have a vested interest in trying to break apart my own contentions. And if it passes all of that, then I mean this sincerely. Who cares if someone paid for it? I mean, again, go ahead and be skeptical towards it, and you should. But the scientific process itself is designed to safeguard as well as it can against those types of influences, because you need not just to be peer reviewed, which is very important, but you also then, even if it passes peer reviewed and it gets published, then presumably other people who care about these things, and there's a lot of people who care about climate science, other people who care about these things are then going to latch onto it and try to recreate your results. So if I have these experiments that I've created that say, look, this proves that global warming is a hoax. It doesn't exist. Here's what I did to come to those same conclusions. Here's my data. Here's my techniques. And I put it all in this formal research paper and it passed peer review. Well, there's a whole lot of scientists out there right now who would very much like to refute that. They would like to show that I'm an idiot in this regard. And when it comes to climate science, I am an idiot. So they would love to refute that before the popular media gets a hold of it. So they're going to immediately try to replicate my experiments. And when they can't, because my data is bullshit, or I made things up, or I rigged it to come to a certain answer, they're going to expose that. That's the scientific method. So again, I'm not saying you shouldn't care about paid for research, but if you don't think that, any research is valid just because somebody paid for it, you're not really paying attention to what the scientific method itself accomplishes. And I'm not saying the scientific method is perfect, because it's still people, right? And scandals have happened in science. But here's the deal. When a scandal happens in science, you know who almost always, or I would say basically always, are the people who expose the scandal? Scientists. Other scientists expose the scandal. What's positivity say here? I used to be the data manager for a NOAA program that collected ocean climate data, and I'm too poor to send you money. I assure you nobody's. Yeah, absolutely correct. I mean, even if none of the individual scientists are making much money, I do understand there's a very valid concern that, like that silly example I gave, if the oil industry gives me a bunch of money to make a report, there's a good chance, if I'm a real scientist, that money doesn't just go into my pocket, right? It goes into me hiring other lab assistants and such to put together experiments. And it goes into, paying for equipment or whatever we need to run the experiments. Might I have gotten some of the money from it? Sure. But it's not like there's an industry out there, or there's not a pipeline out there where scientists who are willing to put their name on a piece of paper are getting $1 million checks just to put bogus results out there. And if there was, they would be exposed very quickly. That's how the scientific method works. So this is so ridiculous to just allow yourself to be completely jaundiced by this idea of paid for research. In a perfect world, there wouldn't be any conflicts of interest. But in a perfect world, science would do itself. I mean, somebody has to do the science, and people and institutions have to get remuneration for what they're doing. Otherwise, they can't keep doing it. So it's all paid for somehow. Even if the science isn't paid for any outside entity, a university or some funded lab is doing the science. So that's still getting paid for. There's still agendas, and scientists do have agendas, unfortunately, just because they're human, but that's what the scientific method is for. Anything else I should say about that bullshit? And finally, I'll just mention, and the fact that no matter what we do, China still nullifies all our efforts combined. I don't know exactly what that means, because there are some reports that China is doing more to combat climate change than we are. But I think what they're implying is that because of the sheer scale of their growing economy, they're doing more damage than we are. But climate change is a huge problem because of the fact that the only way that we know to mitigate it right now is essentially by everyone banding together and agreeing to act differently, sometimes in ways that would very much hurt their own economies. And that's a very tough sell. But is the flip side that we should just say, screw it, don't care? There's too much stupid there to even get into. All right, how we do? Okay, I'm going to do a few more of these here. So my next one starts with, here's what puzzles me. Let's find that. Okay, so JP Burns says, here's what puzzles me. Why did the fossil fuel companies switch their investments to renewable energy sources? For example, geothermal, hydroelectric, and nuclear, then solar, wind, and backup batteries. I think they were submitting this question in good faith. I don't think they were trying to be snarky or undermining. So I'm not an expert in this area, but I just wanted to throw a few comments on this. I thought it was interesting. The fossil fuel companies absolutely have diversified their investments going back many decades. The problem is that the vast majority of all of their income and their profits comes from good old-fashioned oil. So even if a company is in the best faith possible trying to diversify, and get into new markets and such, whether that's diversifying within a given market or trying to get into brand new markets, it's still going to be driven by if 99% of your income and your revenue and your profit comes from one product, you'll try to diversify, but you're always going to keep trying to maintain that product. I mean, that's just business. That's how business works. But then it's funny because it says, for example, geothermal, hydroelectric, and nuclear. I don't think nuclear counts as renewable energy, does it? I mean, geothermal and hydroelectric absolutely are renewable energy sources. Nuclear, I mean, there's in theory, an endless supply of atoms that we could smash up, but there's only, in practice, a handful of materials that work well in fusion core reactors. So, or fission, I should say, because it's fission that they're using. So I don't think that that's at all renewable. Also, I will say that like hydroelectric, we had a huge push for that in this country over the last 100 years. And while that has provided us with a lot of renewable energy, as is often the case with these types of things, it's also come with its own set of consequences. In fact, in a lot of places in the country, they're trying to take dams out because they used to say, oh, you dam up the river, it creates a lake where you didn't have one before. You lose a little bit of land where you had the lake, but other than that, they try to sell it like it really didn't have much impact. but it does. It has a horrible impact on the ecology. But the main answer to this question is, why didn't they switch their investments? Like I said, first of all, they did, although that's always going to be driven by profits. But the other thing is this. You can say, why doesn't Exxon just go into solar now? Well, they don't have a market advantage in solar. I mean, no, who has oil rigs, derricks and all the platforms and all the equipment? Exxon does. I mean, there, of course, other large oil companies do, but there aren't many people that have that, and it's also an incredibly capital intensive business to be in. So, if you wanted to start up a new web app tomorrow, we can do that in my basement with a few guys that know how to write code. If you want to start up a competing oil company, that takes billions of dollars of investment capital to even get your foot in the door. So what that means is that there is a huge cost of barrier to entry for these industries. So once you've crossed that threshold and you are a leader in the industry, it's hard to give that up. Now, there are huge barriers to entry in these other things like solar and wind, but the problem is that they can't squat on the benefits as well as they can in the oil industry, which is why this tends to the oil companies, no matter what they say about how they're trying to diversify, they keep drilling more and they keep finding more oil. How do you distinguish between something being unlikely versus impossible? That's an interesting question. How do you distinguish between I'm not sure what context you're asking that about. If you're asking that somehow about what I was just talking about, or if you're just asking as a theoretical kind of atheist, Christian, religious kind of question about how do you distinguish between unlikely versus impossible. There are a couple ways you can answer that. One is as a statistical answer, which would probably rely on empirical data. So that which is impossible by definition has a 0% likelihood of ever happening. Now, I know you can say, well, but how do you know that it's 0% going forward? Part of that comes down to epistemology and how you actually know anything. I mean, technically speaking, we don't know that that the sun will rise in the east and set in the west tomorrow. I could wake up tomorrow and it could rise in the west and set in the east. However, we have so much corroborating data about everything in the universe, about how planets orbit suns and why our sun rises in the east and sets in the west, and how gravity works and all of that. And we also just have millions of days of clearly collaborated evidence that everywhere around the entire world, as far as mankind has ever known, the sun has always risen in the east and set in the west. Does that 100 perfect percent guarantee that tomorrow the sun will not rise in the west and set in the east? No. But there is a certain point, again, talking about things from an epistemological perspective, that if you just only waited until you had perfect, irrefutable knowledge of what would happen in the future, you would never be able to do anything. You'd never be able to do a single scientific experiment. You would never be able to, drive your car. You'd never be able to accomplish anything, because no matter how well you think you know something, you don't know if the whole rules of the universe are going to change tomorrow. But from a probabilistic perspective, it's ridiculous to think that maybe tomorrow the sun will rise in the west and set in the east. No, it will not. And there's not a shred of reason to believe it is. Now, what makes something unlikely? I mean, that's a whole different thing. Some people would say anything that's less than 50% likely is unlikely. Some people would put higher percentages on that. But it's a mix of empirical data and repeatable experiments, repeatable, and quantifying that which is falsifiable versus unfalsifiable. All right, next comment. We're going to do a few more of these. I'm going to take us up to I've been doing this a couple hours. I guess I still have like 15 of you around, so you guys are gluttons for punishment. Of course, you're probably not even listening. You probably have it on the background or something, which is fine with me. That's fine. But okay. I got a lot of comments on the science stuff, so I thought these were kind of interesting to go through. It says, I am a retired biology instructor. All my life before, during, and after my career days, I have had the personality traits you attribute to scientists. I don't understand how anyone could find fault with them. I am a liberal with a scientific bent and will remain so until someone can convince me to be otherwise. I wanted to highlight this comment because of this one sentence here in the middle that says, I don't understand how anyone could find fault with them. Probably because of the nature of this channel and because of the nature of content that I now consume as part of doing this channel, I probably have a skewed perspective on this. But it is shocking and dismaying to me to see the extent to which there are Christians out there who will happily disparage science as a whole, like it's this evil cabal, or like science is, it's just a religion and you're following your own religion, or it's, it's all paid for research and we can't trust it, or it's all a conspiracy theory by people who want to create a global ending event every 10 years and then change the predictions after it doesn't happen. I mean, this stuff goes on endlessly, and some of these people were saying these things just out of ignorance. They just don't understand what science is, what the scientific method is. I have a video coming out, I think tomorrow, Friday, where I react to a video from Hank Green. Hank Green has no idea who I am. But I react to a video from Hank Green where he is talking about what is science. So I hope you guys see that. But it's one thing if you don't consider yourself to be a scientific person. That's fine. It's one thing if you want to be a fundamentalist. I mean, I think it's strange. I do think it's a little dumb, but I do understand that maybe this is just your faith. You think that God made the world in 10 days or whatever, 6 days and 10,000 years, or, that we've been around or something. Believe whatever you want. But to disparage science is just so mind-blowingly ignorant to me, because it really tells me that you literally have no idea what science is. Science is not a mindset. Science is not a cabal. Science is not a conspiracy theory. It's not a push by the scientific community to promote or deny anything. Scientists as a whole don't want to promote climate science. I mean, some of them are climate scientists, but they don't want to promote global warming. They want to follow the information where it leads them. Now, scientists, as I've mentioned before, some of them, all of them have agendas because we're human, and they have mistakes and they have egos, and these things do impact science on a small level here and there where people are trying to push certain agendas. But generally speaking, not only do most scientists not have those types of agendas, but more importantly, science is self-correcting. Science doesn't care about your Bible. Science doesn't care about your religion. It doesn't care about your God. It doesn't care about how devout you are. It doesn't care about any of it. All science is it's a methodology that we can use to solve problems. Or as I said in this video where I'm reacting to Hank Green, I specifically said science is a methodology by which we find repeatable ways to predict the natural universe. So if you can come out with a real scientific discovery tomorrow that says global warming doesn't exist. By real, I don't mean some hack paper by some Christian fundamentalist zealot who's basically just saying that global warming is fake because he wants you to trust in God. I mean, if you're a real ass scientist and you have an amazing experiment with data and it's repeatable, it's verifiable, it's peer reviewed, and you could put that out tomorrow to disprove all of these things that that scientists have been saying is global warming, if you could disprove that, you would overnight become a rock star. And I don't mean you would just become a rock star in the religious community or in the skeptic, the cynical community. I mean, you would become a rock star in the scientific community. If I could disprove even one tiny aspect of Einstein's special or general theories of relativity, I would overnight become a rock star. Now, again, the caveat there is when I say disprove, it's not me putting out some non-peer-reviewed Terrence Howard paper about how 1+1 = 0 or something. I mean, it would have to be real science. It would have to go through the rigor that one would expect from real science. It would have to be peer-reviewed. It would have to have verifiable, repeatable experiments and data. But if I could do that, I would immediately become one of the most important scientists of the 21st century. And what scientist or what person doesn't want that? I mean, people like money, they like glory, they like fame, they like respect. So it's baked into the process that scientists don't want to tell you that the world's going to heat up and die. Scientists don't want to tell you that you can't have your 7-mile-per-gallon super diesel truck or whatever. They're just following the data and the experiments where it leads them. And to characterize those traits as somehow being evil or anti-God or part of some cabal, it's not just wrong-headed. It's not just empirically incorrect. It's downright sad to think how someone can get that so twisted. If you came to me and said, I want to be a better fisherman, and instead of trying to tell you how to be a better fisherman, I said, I don't know how to fish, but I have a process that you can follow that will help you to figure out not just how to be a better fisherman, but how to get more fish in this particular lake or in this pond or this river or this part of the ocean. Even though I don't know what the answers are, I know that if you follow this process every time and you're careful about it, fastidious about it, eventually you will find the best answers for how to be a better fisherman. What's wrong with that? How is that a bad thing? Just because I'm following the data. Now, granted, the data might show me that your favorite lure that your grandpa made for you when you were 5, the data might show you that lure sucks. And maybe you shouldn't use it anymore. And maybe that makes you feel some kind of way because you really love grandpa and you really love that lure. And I think that's where a lot of these ridiculous feelings about science comes from, because people get emotionally attached to their own convictions. They get emotionally attached to the lure that grandpa made them. And they say they want to be a better fisherman, but then when you show them a process that will allow them to learn how to be a better fisherman, and part of that process is that they realize that lure they've been trying to use is crappy, then they don't want to commit to those discoveries. They want to find some way to lash out against them because it makes them uncomfortable. But that's so small-headed and sad. All right, let's do one more. Praise the Lord. We're going to do one more, and then we're going to call it a night. Oh, you know what? This is going to be a really quick one, because I'm sure that the person who asked me this question probably will not be watching the end of this video, but sometimes I'm not sure where to, like YouTube doesn't give you on your page like a place to put terms and conditions necessarily. So I did have this one person ask this, and I figured it would just be nice to cover it, even though I'm sure this person will not be actually watching this video. But he said, it would be nice to know how long you reserve videos for members only. For anyone who wonders, here's what I've been doing. I make videos beforehand. Like sometimes I'll sit down and record 2 or 3 or 4 videos, and then the next day or 2 days I'll get them edited and ready to put out. But when you do that, you don't want to release them all on the same day. I have like a release schedule, and I usually release no more than 1 video or 3 videos a week. Usually Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So ideally, when I can, I'm getting ahead of that process, right? Sometimes I'll have 5 or 10 or sometimes even 20 or 25 videos I've done, which are completely edited. They're just scheduled to go off 2 weeks from now or 3 weeks from now or 4 weeks from now. So as a perk that I've given to the members, I can just set the videos to only be available to anyone on the posting date, on the official published date. But as a perk to members, I've set them to members only until the time that they go fully live, so that the members can see them earlier. But, you know, this person here who wrote this question doesn't understand, and that's fine. I get it. They're like, you know, how long do you reserve videos for? It's not a given set of time. It's not like I sit there with every video that I make and say, it's going to be members only for 2 weeks, and then I'll release it to the public. Depends on how far ahead I'm getting of my publication schedule. If I'm getting way ahead, I might have a video from 2 months from now that's technically scheduled to go live in 2 months, but the members will see it for the next 2 months. Sometimes I do a video that I record today about some prescient topic, and I want to publish it as soon as I get done with it. And in those cases, it doesn't sit in members only format for even 1 minute. It just goes completely live for everyone at the point that I post it. Other times it might be there available for members for a day or two or for a week. It's kind of random. It just depends on where I'm at getting ahead of the publishing or content creation monster. So it's not the size of the hook, it's how you wiggle the worm. You just keep telling yourself that annoying things. I tell myself the same thing every day, and it still hasn't been true, not even now that I'm 52. But yeah, sometimes you got to tell yourself those things. Okay, I think that is going to be the entire live stream for the night. This is like the third one I've ever done. I've said before, I don't know if I'm going to do these on the regular or maybe never do them again. I feel like there's two good avenues of content for this. One is the replying to comments. And then other times it's just like when there's like some news snippet like this evangelical thing that says, welcome to Voltaire. So I think that means I have a new member. Welcome to you. Welcome on board. I love my members. I love everyone, but you know, members I love 10 times more. So thank you very much. But when I have like a news snippet, like, you know, the whole white evangelicals, the 40% who still think that Trump is perfectly ethical, I thought, you know, of course I could have made a regular video about this. I could have edited it and made a script and all that stuff. But I said, no, let me just do a live stream and jump on here and spew at the screen for a while. But thank you to everyone. I hope to see you all again soon. But until I do, lo, I say unto you, stay skeptical.